I wonder if I could invite Camélia and Ed to join us again. We head straight into the Q&A session, and I'm pleased to say we've got a wide variety of interesting questions. And I wonder, Ed, if we can start off with one directed at you, please.
Sure.
Excellent. So this one is, it appears that you have a legacy of now non-code compliant buildings in New Zealand. And the remedies which you are installing now will bear fruit in the future. However, what are your suggested fixes for the remaining stock, which are almost like a ticking bomb? Will it be a schedule of inspections backed up from rigid governance, or is it through insurance pressures and commercial persuasion? So an interesting and quite an extensive question there. I wonder what your comments might be.
All of the above. I think the reality is that all of those three mechanisms are at play in terms of improving the existing building stock. Certainly, following the combustible cladding situation that we have, I think the insurers, given that we have a harder market now, are taking more interest in buildings, and that is a good thing in terms of having another external stakeholder take interest in the building stock. I think the first part of the question, where that was going, particularly from a regulatory perspective, is that, as I discussed, we already have a regime that and a regime on paper that should ensure ongoing building maintenance and ensure the quality of the building over the building's life cycle. So I think as really discussed with everything in terms of increasing the understanding, awareness and education in the industry, whilst we've had a building warrant of fitness regime in place for many years, which should ensure that buildings are undergoing annual inspections, including of the passive fire features. The reality is that has been failing in many areas for all of the same reasons that the installation and construction in new buildings has been failing. So I think what we'll see, just like with the improvements that we'll see in construction of new buildings, the existing building stock will again continue to improve, because the people that we've got working through those buildings in terms of the inspections that they're doing and their understanding of what it is they should be doing, what it is they should be looking at, and how they can resolve and remediate those buildings to bring them up to compliance, not just to today's standards, but bring them back into compliance with the original design standard to when what was required at the time when the building was built, will mean again that we'll continue to see an increase in the buildings being brought back to, at least as a minimum, the standard to which they're originally designed.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, I think we can recognise those issues and potential solutions internationally. So yeah, that's great. Thank you for expanding on that. I wonder if I could ask one of Camélia now, please. We've got quite a simple technical question here. It's concerning the intumescent coating that's in the laminated glass that you were talking about. Is it crystal clear, and who makes these coatings?
Oh yes, it's really transparent like glass. You cannot see the difference between simple glass and the laminated with intumescent interlayer glass. And it can be silica based or organic, like I explained during the presentation. It's a silica based intumescent interlayer.
And if I could just ask a quick follow-up question on that. How do we recognize fire-resistant glazing in a building?
Yes, in a building, the fire-resistant glass have to be a stamp specifying the name of product, the rating, and the producer. So in the airports, when you see some people searching about the stamp on the glass, you can know that they are specialists in fire-resistant glass. Yes.
Oh, I see. Yes, I'm often accused of looking up trying to spot smoke detectors on ceilings. So yeah, you've got a similar problem. I understand. Thank you for that. Matthew, can I ask, will passive fire protection play just as an important role in fire safety strategy of buildings in the future? I think I might suspect I know an answer to this, but I'd like your views on it, please.
Well, I think it will, Peter, thanks. But I think it'll probably in slightly different ways, but to the same principles. I think it's really quite interesting, having not seen the presentations before today, but Camélia's presentation about the use of glass is a perfect example about the evolution of that product, being able to use the propensity for designers and architects to say, well, we want the building to be as open as possible, and we want to have broad open spaces, and if we have to have some barrier, can we be able to see through it to be able to connect people? And you know, that kind of interest in the health of a building and how people move around it is one of the key drivers. I think the other is, though, that there are lots of building materials that are entering the marketplace that we perhaps haven't seen before, that are being used for other purposes than just their price of installation, or their durability, or their fire safety effectiveness. It might be their sustainability or their energy efficiency. Whilst those causes are noble, I think it actually tips off a new era for the fire protection fraternity globally to say, how can we continue to support those kind of sustainability objectives in a safe way? And I think passive fire protection has quite a role to play in relation to making that possible. And by the way, for the record, I spend a lot of time being accused of looking at the ceiling as well. I think everyone in the fire industry, that's a global thing.
Absolutely brilliant. Thank you for that. I wonder if I could return to you, please, Ed. I've got two questions that I think that might be quite quick to clear up. First of all, is Intertex IQP Firestop Inspector Programme, or the IFC programme, recognised in New Zealand for engineers undertaking firestop inspections?
So the quick answer would be no, but not in as such as there's no recognition of it. It's probably fair to say that for all intents and purposes, it doesn't really exist over here. So it's probably fair to say that we've got a quite diverse community. So if you were to ask all of the fire protection community over here what qualifications and experience they had, then you'd find we have quite an international and broad-based group of people, and so some of those would quite potentially have it, as they would have quite a range of fire experience overseas. The issue we have is that in terms of the question about recognition, is that there is because there's been no government interaction and regulation in that sense. It's been down to industry to self-regulate itself, and in a self-regulatory environment that we've had, the industry has really not taken anything, taken the opportunity to identify what it should have to recognise what was available. So this is why there's some of us in the industry are aware of lots of schemes and lots of things available outside of New Zealand, but without central government saying what was required or what's recognised, and without any particular organisation saying or recognising anything, then none of those sorts of schemes have made it into any kind of legislative requirements. In terms of recognition, though, there would be the ability, because of the way we operate, for someone with one of those qualifications and with any of those recognised schemes to come into New Zealand and effectively say that they have that and use that as a basis for demonstrating compliance or recognition, like you could with almost any qualification in that sense, in terms of being able to demonstrate that you had some training qualification in the field. But again, it's difficult, because without any kind of formal recognition at the government level, or without the industry itself saying this is what we as the industry recognise as a level, the problem is you're not on a true playing field, and without a proper true playing field that everyone can play with, the reality is you get to a situation where anyone can compete without any qualifications at all.
I wonder if Matthew, I was just going to ask Matthew, what's the situation in Australia?
Yeah, look, it's very similar, and I think following on from what Ed said there, is that perhaps the best way to describe it is that even something as important as product conformity and product certification is a voluntary option within the codes in Australia. So there are multiple pathways to demonstrate evidence that your product is suitable. They have varying levels of assessment rigor associated with them, and there's a lot of selective approach in relation to that, very subjective decision making by a range of stakeholders. But what UL has discovered is that there is quite an appetite from the stakeholders in the industry who have invested in doing things well and good practice to have recognition for that. And to be able to have that point of difference in the marketplace, and that extends beyond product conformity to the recognition of competency of skills. So our investment in this region, Australia and New Zealand, is to bring that good practice approach, but certainly we're in a position where we're demonstrating that as a voluntary measure, and the credibility of that is important to link to local regulatory requirements in terms of the outcomes, but might not be able to be linked to local regulatory requirements in terms of the needs to have at the moment. So it's a little chicken and egg process, really, and I guess we're confident that there's enough appetite in this region to bring those kind of services here.
Lovely, thank you for that. And just following on from that, Ed, I just wonder if so we spoke about recognition of individuals for the competence of undertaking inspections, but in New Zealand, is there a register of certification bodies? Do you have any requirements set for others to operate there?
Again, no. What we do have, though, in that regard is I suppose a quite a strong recognition of the need for accreditation. So, in terms of I suppose our regime and recognition of practices, having accreditation from a fire testing house is extremely important. So, from a regulatory perspective, if we were presented with information, and again, as Matt's kind of described, it's really down to the individual regulator and the individual person who is in charge of consenting things, what it is that they are prepared to accept. But in terms of things like product conformity and who can do whatever, it's really down to the quality of information provided to support that. But what we do have in that space is recognition that accreditation, particularly of the fire testing houses, is particularly important.
Sure, thank you. Now, I've been told that we've got a little time to run over if we can, so I'd just like to squeeze another couple of questions in. If I could just bring Camélia back in. What do you think that the current trends or the future trends might be in the fire-resistant glazing field?
So the request today is for bigger glass, thinner, lighter. So the request is more and more exigent for aesthetic, also combination with security, bulletproof. These last years we see an increase of a combination of performances, fire and other glass performances.
Lovely, thank you. And I've got an interesting question for Matthew, if that's okay. Why is product certification that includes production surveillance important for passive fire products in lieu of testing alone?
That's a really interesting question, Peter. I think we would probably draw or point towards the ISO suite of standards in relation to this. So ISO 17067 is a very broad international standard about the kind of components that you can put into a certification scheme. And it goes through, there's a great table in there that talks about different scheme types, and they go up with the assessment rigor based on the components that are in the scheme as you would write them. So different bodies can write different scheme types, and they can include different elements. Lots of schemes get to the point, at least in the first one or two of the main 6 that are discussed, that will include a test and will include an evaluation of the product and then stop, or maybe potentially include some batch testing at the time of that initial evaluation. So those tests are valuable, and that certification approach has recognition as being an appropriate way of doing things. But I guess you could link it directly in relation to what the risk of product failure is and what confidence that you want to have in relation to the product. So if it's a life safety product, like the things in the fire protection industry, UL would say it would be important to go to the next step beyond just batch testing and a point in time test of the product and the evaluation on what might be a golden sample approved for the test, to have a certification that is based on ongoing inspections or quality management system audits to make sure that the product that actually arrives on the building site and is installed conforms just like the one that passed the test. And we indicate that, or we get feedback that there's a two-pronged value here. One is that the immediate one is that the product complies and is installed and will achieve the performance that's expected of it, and therefore linked to the safety outcomes. But two, also from manufacturers who see this as an independent and built-in quality management system for their own product. And I've often spoken to some of our inspectors who do auditing of products and say, when you turn up to the factory to do the audit, how are you greeted? Are you greeted as, oh, here comes the inspector from UL, what are they going to find? Or are you greeted with open arms saying, please come and have a look at what we're doing? And every single time it's the latter, in the sense that our customers and manufacturers broadly who get product certification processes that have that production surveillance component, they want to know as early as possible, whether there's some problem in the quality management system they've employed to produce the product, to reduce their liability, because there's nothing more damaging to brand integrity to have to put out a recall notice for something that has been missed in the production process. And so, that element of production surveillance that certification schemes can include is really quite important, and then very distinct between what we're certainly used to in this region is getting a one-off test. A fire door could have been tested in 1985 and we're still trying to use the same report or kind of different version of it, but the production could have changed quite significantly since then. So that's what production surveillance would pick up, and that's what gives confidence back to the market and empowers that trust.
Fantastic. No, that's really important. I don't know how closely you've been following the proceedings of the Grenfell Tower public inquiry, but it was brought to the fore a couple of weeks ago how important this very issue is, because quite naturally, manufacturers are constantly improving and the efficiency of their production processes, perhaps tweaking the materials, making things more efficiently. So it's very important that whenever there is a change in the manufacturing process, that it's that material that is retested and not relying on out of date or old certification. So yes, I fully support that production surveillance that you're talking about. Thank you. Right, well, I think we've just about come to the end of the time that's available to us, as it's getting close to past. So we've slightly run over, but I think that's okay. I don't think we're going to get told off for that. I just want to thank our 3 expert speakers today for their input and for participating in that Q&A session. I've certainly learned a lot. I think I hand over to Philip now, because I think we've now got some networking before our second part of the session a bit later on. Thank you very much.